The topic today is about the rapids of Grand Canyon. And this is a topic that I've gotten to be pretty familiar with. In fact, it's such an important kind of focus on many river trips that it's rather difficult for people to see the rest of Grand Canyon except for the rapids, especially if they're rowing a boat for the first time. So today what I'd like to do is take you on a conceptual journey through Grand Canyon geomorphically to try to describe how the rapids form, where they occur, but then also to give you a personal perspective on my life as a whitewater river guide, that in which I've had to deal with these rapids and come to know them over the last 5 decades. So but first to remind us of the Museum of Northern Arizona's phenomenally important role in understanding Grand Canyon. Some of the characters of the past that have played a big role: Walter McDougall, long-term botanist in the Grand Canyon region, author of several books that we're still using. Eddie McKee, the first ranger naturalist in Grand Canyon, later became a very world-renowned geologist, geomorphologist. Dr. Steve Crothers, former curator of biology at the museum, led many expeditions through Grand Canyon, and is still doing research on Grand Canyon and helped frame a lot of the management and understanding of how to better allow people to come through this remarkable landscape. And just to remind people about where we are, we're in Grand Canyon. We're about halfway through the course of the Colorado River, from its headwaters in Wyoming and the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, down through the Four Corners states, and before it hits Lake Mead and then drops south towards the Sea of Cortez. And so it's a 1,400-mile long river that Grand Canyon falls about in the middle of. And then kind of closer up for Grand Canyon, this is a map made by George Billingsley and Haiti Hampton in 1999. Phenomenal work by George, who's hiked probably more than anybody else on the planet in terms of being able to map out the rims of Grand Canyon. And in that, he didn't quite recognize what he'd produced with this, but it gave us a way to understand the biology and biogeography of this remarkable landscape feature, because he shows here with this map a very isolated eastern basin in which most of our unique species occur, and then an open basin off to the west that's more connected to the deserts to the south and to the west, and with this constricting point called the Moab Gorge. The Moab Gorge being one geomorphic reach within the overall Grand Canyon. But this map has been really essential for understanding how life and many things, archaeology, human activities, have occurred in Grand Canyon. All right. So today's talk, again, is looking at the rapids of Grand Canyon from my perspective, a boatman's personal perspective. But we'll talk about navigating Grand Canyon, some of the history there, where the rapids occur, why they're where they are, how large they are. Let's talk a little bit about rapid rating systems, how dangerous they are, how they form and change. And then the latter half of the talk will be essentially taking a river trip through Grand Canyon, focusing on these rapids. For many of us, before we entered Grand Canyon, before we actually got to go into Grand Canyon, we had heard many stories about the rapids there. Every boatman in the world pretty much hears about lava falls and crystal and some of the huge whitewater that's in Grand Canyon. And so I want to take you through a tour of what some of those rapids are, not to scare you off from doing a river trip if you are contemplating doing so, but to engage you in the kind of the large-scale symphony of this incredible landscape. I was talking with a composer friend about trying to put together a symphonic piece of the array of rapids and their various intensities and characters as you move all the way through Grand Canyon. It'd be a really wonderful piece of music to replace the Ferdy Grofé music on Grand Canyon. Haven't done that yet, but it's there to be done. It would be a pretty fantastic piece of music to write. And then I want to talk a little bit about river guides who run the rapids, what it takes to become a river guide, and some of the lessons that that some of us have learned by being river guides in Grand Canyon. All right, always with Grand Canyon, we have to think about stratigraphy. We have to think about the structure of the rocks that the canyon moves through. And a couple of the layers of rocks are quite soft and quite easily eroded. And this involves the Hermit Formation especially, and the Supai group. These, especially the three upper formations within the Supai group. And these are stones that are soft. They freeze and thaw very actively, so they're falling a lot. They're very unstable to try to climb through. And also down below, the Muav limestone and Bright Angel Shale, also very kind of loose rock, easily eroded. When it rains, especially when it snows first and then rains on top of that, such as the kind of event that we can get this time of year, there are situations in which water, pours onto the cliffs or saturates the beds of talus that develop through these formations, but at the base of these formations, and that material can be transported downslope by water and by gravity. We all remember that it's not really the river that's carving Grand Canyon, it's about the freezing and thawing, and then the descent of the sediments that are eroded from freezing and thawing into the river that's carried 75,000 cubic miles of the Earth's crust through Grand Canyon over the last 60 million years or so. So these some of the layers that are really contributing a lot to the movement of sediments from the upper cliffs down into Grand Canyon. And one thing that Ted Mellis and Bob Webb have been able to do research on in this from the U.S. Geological Survey is that we have an incredible number of tributaries in Grand Canyon. Nearly 530 tributaries reach the Colorado River. And these are passing through, they're in different geomorphic reaches that are based on the hardness of the parent rock and the parent rock types. And through these geomorphic reaches in the river, there's variation in the width and depth. Soft rock generally produces a shallow, sometimes swifter flowing portion of the river, whereas hard rock creates a deeper V-shaped channel, narrower river, more serious rapids with harder rock. So when these tributaries reach the river, they've brought in material, and they bring it in through a process called debris flows. Debris flows are intense flurries of concrete-like water and sand and gravel that transports big boulders. And if you want to kind of really have some fun, Google on debris flows and all the movies that have been made of debris flows happening. They're quite terrifying. These are flooding events in which boulders the size of school buses can be transported, can actually float in this heavier slurry and be transported. Now, the source of the materials is often, as I say, from the Hermit Shale, the Supai group, the Muav, and the Bright Angel. And when debris flows happen that transport those loose materials from those strata down into channels and out to the river, then those materials can constrict the river. The river is, it's pretty much a either flat or V-shaped channel with a kind of typical width based on the parent rock geology. But when debris flows coming down these tributaries bring large particles in, they constrict the river and create a much narrower situation. They dump basically a dam of rocks into the river, and then the river pours over it. That makes most of the rapids in Grand Canyon pool drop rapids. Relatively short, the longest rapid is probably 1 kilometer in length, Hance Rapid. But these are rapids that are pool drop forms. There's quiet water up above, the water dams up behind these rock piles, pours over them, usually creating a deep scour hole, as Matt Kaplinski's been able to really wonderfully show us by mapping the floor of the river with very sophisticated equipment over time. And then the river shallows out again and continues on its way. But this configuration of a debris fan, eddy fan complex that constricts the river is kind of one of the main features. That constriction creates a recirculating zone, what we call an eddy. And the eddy, as I show on the top graph there, has a point where the current separates from the shore, the separation point, and then down below the eddy, the current reattaches to the shore. Now, why is that important? It's important because that recirculation zone captures sand. And that sand then is under high flows, the sand's been brought into the eddy and circulated around. And when the water level drops back down after, say, the spring floods and whatnot, then it leaves sand deposits. And those are sand deposits that we camp on, that have very characteristic vegetation, wildlife habitat, etc. So this whole nexus of an eddy fan complex is creating a very much repeated ecological structure through the river 530 times. So 530 kind of replicated debris fan complexes in which we can look at all kinds of factors. Also interesting with Grand Canyon is remember that the strata are the strata swale up and then swale down again, and the river cuts through them, so that the rocks that the river is passing through are exposed twice. Once on the upside of the East Kaibab monocline, the upper canyon, and again to a large extent in the lower canyon as those sedimentary strata and are tilted back into the Earth's crust. So it's kind of a very nice mirrored image of rock types as you go through Grand Canyon. This concept of a debris fan complex, something that Jack Schmidt and Julie Graff put together in 1990. It's a pretty kind of wonderful big view of how this river is structured geomorphically. So here's some examples, just that these high flow events, HFEs, whatever those are, natural or now managed flows, are put through to manage sand. And they're managed sand because of this eddy debris fan complex concept and the way that sand gets distributed in floods. And so on the right side there, you can see an eroded sandbar before an HFE, before a high flow event. The high flow event comes along, fills the whole channel. Sediment is transported very actively, and when the water recedes, you have sandbars that are rejuvenated by this process. High flow experiments are being used to manage sediment because most of the sediments coming through the Colorado River are captured in Lake Powell, and this is a way to store sediments at higher, what we call stage elevations above the water surface, allowing them to erode back in, but it extends the duration of time that sediment stays in the system. So a very sophisticated sediment management system has been developed for Grand Canyon because of this entire process. Also, it's the case that the sandbars in Grand Canyon are in fixed locations because of the debris fans and their structure. All right, so here's a kind of a more descriptive view of all these, the separation point. The flow here is from the right to the left, separation point up to at the base of the debris fan there. And the separation deposit forms on the kind of the backside of the separation point in the eddy there. There's a return current channel as the recirculating flow scours out a shoreline channel there. That becomes very important for native fish. There's a reattachment deposit that develops upstream of the reattachment point, and then downstream, downstream there are channel margin deposits. Each of these is a very characteristic feature of Grand Canyon, supporting vegetation and habitat, and also campsite recreational aspects of Grand Canyon. All right. So this geomorphic configuration is a pretty wonderful thing to be able to understand, and it's taken quite a few people, quite a few decades to be able to put this whole story together with very sophisticated underwater mapping, aerial photography, and repeated surveys of the river corridor. So let's talk now a little bit about river running in Grand Canyon. What it's all about. River running is a worldwide sport. Everywhere in the world, pretty much, people are running rivers for the joy of being on moving water and the adventure of navigating whitewater. About 27,000 people a year pass through the river corridor, as opposed to 5 to 6 million people visiting on the rim. So it's a relatively small group of number of people that get to pass through Grand Canyon on boats. But these are oftentimes fairly well-to-do people. The trips are not inexpensive, and now we've had about 1.5 million people go through Grand Canyon, which is, in my view, a good thing, because we have then a large constituency of fairly well-off people that can really help prevent, say, proposals for dams that we can help better protect Grand Canyon. And as a river guide, that's been my long-term goal, has been to communicate as much as we can to America, to the world, about the need to preserve this remarkably beautiful landscape, and very unique landscape. Of course, a long history of river running, and starting with Powell, or some say James White, in the mid 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s. Powell and Stanton, Robert Brewster Stanton, went through and photographed the canyon, giving us a remarkable set of images of what the canyon looked like before there was much human impact on it. And Bob Webb and others and Ray Turner especially, actually started the process of rematching photos. He and Gene Shoemaker, and then Bob Webb really took up that torch and did a great job with matching those photographs, looking at the changes over time. River runners came along. Quite a few of elder folks. Georgie Clark started running in the 1940s. Before that, Norm Nevels had started commercial river running in 1938, building his first boat from an outhouse. People like Martin Litton started Grand Canyon Dories, and were really able to bring great voice and moment to protecting Grand Canyon from dams like those proposed in Marble Canyon and down in the Lower Canyon. And me, I wrote a river guide back in 1983. This is a kind of a takeoff on several river guides that pre-existed that, but I wasn't satisfied with the amount of information about the rest of Grand Canyon besides the rapids that was represented there. So that river guide is still available through Grand Canyon Wildlands Council if people are interested in taking a look at that. But quite a history of river running here, and David Lavender's history of the early river runners is really a wonderful book to take a look at. The commercial era, as I said, started in 1938. In the pre-commercial times, river running was quite dangerous. 5% of the people that ran the river died. So think about Powell's first expedition, losing 3 men. They weren't lost on the river, but they were lost on the expedition. Robert Brewster Stanton lost 3 men as well on his first expedition. Prior to 1938, running the river was quite dangerous, and there were quite a number of unrecovered bodies from that time period. Tom Myers and Mr. Giglieri's, Dr. Giglieri's work on death in Grand Canyon is a good reference there. Tom Myers and I also wrote a book on what we call Fateful Journey, really documenting that and trying to work through some of those early issues. After 1938, river running went through a big technological advance. Georgie White creating big boats that were safe enough for families to begin running rivers. And just at that time as well, we began to become aware of the value of wilderness. Yes, there were upruns by Doc Marston and others, kind of big adventures in kind of uprunning technology in boats, and lots of challenges there. But America gradually became aware of the value of wilderness. Grand Canyon plays a very special role in that, with the work by Martin Litton and others, in terms of bringing voice and imagery to the American public. And that is really, I think, pretty much the foundation. That and Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring really, I think, started the American environmental movement. So David Brower and Martin can't be acknowledged enough in their tremendous work in enlightening the entire world on the value of these wildlands. However, actually running the river remained kind of limited until the mid-1960s, and then late 1960s, early 1970s, suddenly, 20,000 people began running the river. There were a number of kind of companies that had been started without much oversight from the National Park Service, and the National Park Service stepped in and began regulating the number of companies, the number of trips, the trip schedules, who was running the boats, and river running etiquette for Grand Canyon, beginning in the late 60s, early 70s. There were initially about 21 companies. Now it's down to about 16. Gradually, the larger companies are gobbling up the mom and pop operations, leading, in my view, to a reduction in the diversity of offerings that we have for river running. The river is managed by the National Park Service river management plans. These are updated every few decades, and provide guidance and regulations for most of the activities in the river corridor. All right, so over time, there's been a number of ways to get down the river. In the middle is the first commercial boat there. These are sad iron cataract boats made of wood. As I said, Norman Ebbles made the first one out of an outhouse. Other wooden boats, like the one to the right of that, a sweep scow, turns out not to be a very good boat for this river. The two individuals on that boat there disappeared, sunk without a trace, as Brad Dimmick says, and sunk without a sound. He reconducted that trip with Jerry Ledbetter a few years back, and that is definitely not the right boat to take through Grand Canyon. Just hair-raising stories about trying to run some of the rapids there. Many other boat types, dories, especially inflatable rafts. These larger rafts, like that Whitewater River Adventures boat there, is actually a combination of pontoons that were designed for World War II to be able to quickly put bridges across rivers in Europe. So these pontoons were they're inflatable. You just lay track across them to get a bridge across a river, anchor them, and put a track across them. You could drive tanks on them. They're so good for in their flotation. And Georgie Clark and others began to put together the story of, okay, well, if we put these things together, if we make them big enough, maybe they won't flip in some of the rapids we've got to deal with. Smaller versions like that snout rig up on the top right there, just two bridge pontoons with a frame in between, can carry about 7 or 8 people or so. The bigger boats, these big pontoon boats, range in size from 28 feet to 42 feet, carrying up to 20 passengers. Georgie Clark on the upper left there got the idea of putting a lot of them together and putting groups of smaller inflatable boats together, the thrill boats, and she would have what some river runners call floating ant hives, with sometimes up to 80 people on a trip all together, all tied up. She was quite a remarkable woman. I met her many times, and on the river, got hit by water balloons from her parties as they were going by, and really just what a character, just incredible character. Dories, as I say, started by Martin Litton, catamaran rafts, a more recent kind of development, and then kayaks running the river. Also, various kind of boards have been used for running the river. A large circular object called a water trotter, and several other kind of unsuccessful ways of being able to transport oneself down the river. Many boats there. If you get a chance to meet Brad Dimmick and talk to him about boats, just a world of expertise in the design, construction, and history of these craft. Okay, what does it take to be Conniebbetts running a boat like this with 20 passengers or 15, 18, 20 passengers through Crystal at high water? Connie is a just incredibly wonderful, incredibly talented woman, just a powerhouse and just fabulous river runner. She has, about as much grit as anyone I've ever met. So what does it take to become a river runner? The requirements for becoming a river runner in Grand Canyon are you have to do 6 trips with your own boat. Now, it's almost impossible to do that unless you volunteer your time to a river company. And in many cases, people spend an entire year or more taking a boat through, beginning to learn the rapids. 6 trips gives you a rough sense of where things are if you're paying a lot of attention, which you better be. And after 6 trips, you probably are able to take passengers through as long as you've finished your knowledge of safety and first aid, had some nature interpretation, and know your equipment. That kind of boat. For a trip leader, 20 trips is the minimum. Most of the commercial operating trip leaders have hundreds of trips. The most is probably something on the order of 800 trips. I'm not quite sure how many Brian Durker has done, for example, but the depth of knowledge is he's hit every rock down there. Not this one shown in the photo here, but these are the kind of things that you may need to deal with. And to take that takes a certain pretty bold personality, really a can-do and a will-do attitude. Okay, we've got this boat, it's strapped here. What are we going to do? This is actually a boating excavation rescue trip that we're looking at here at Lava Falls. But for long-term guys, it takes a huge amount of self-sufficiency. I can do everything by myself if I need to. Fortunately, I've got my dearest friends on the planet with me, and on this trip, we'll be able to get passengers safely through this incredibly rigorous wilderness. The concept of wa is Japanese. It's awareness of group energy, and the best guides are remarkably aware of how the entire trip is doing, who's suffering, who has kind of trepidation and issues and whatnot. It takes obviously a lot of gut, a lot of grit. If you don't have a sense of humor, you'll never survive as a river guide because things can get too serious. Takes a lot of patience. For most guides, it takes a very genuine interest in people too. There are river guides who maybe suffer from a bit more hubris and arrogance and don't pay enough attention to other people, but they're not as happy in the job as people that are really there to help guide, especially first-time visitors into this landscape. And the reason that interest is important is because in just a large number of cases, this becomes a life-changing adventure. I know a remarkable number of people who, after doing one river trip, completely turned their lives around and either became river runners, became wilderness advocates, worked for the betterment of the ecological health of the planet. So that interest is really, really quite critical. I think of Jerry Ledbetter, for example, who, taking a river trip, it turned her life around completely, and she became the leader of the Grand Canyon River Guides, which is a really fabulous organization dedicated to the protection of the canyon and to the well-being of river guides. They, along with the Whale Foundation and Grand Canyon Youth, are 3 of the most impressive nonprofits that I know of. there are many pitfalls to being a river guide. There's a really strong phenomenon of you live your life as a hero on the river and come back to ignominy. And that leads to isolation and depression during the winter months, especially. There's also a tremendous burnout factor if you're doing 8, 10, 12 trips per year. Some of the motor guides, and it used to be a fairly common practice for oar guides as well, that by the end of the season you can't really talk to anybody at all. You need several months just to decompress. That depression can be quite dire and can lead to substance abuse and many other problems. So organizations like the Whale Foundation is really great for being able to help boatmen with those kind of problems. This is also a relatively low pay, so certainly a non-union kind of activity, and river guides get taken advantage of oftentimes. I was always told, you river guides are a dime a dozen, and that's about what we got paid back in those early days. This is definitely the wrong job for anybody with a family life. You're away. The river trips last from 6 to 21 days in duration. So you can't be away from a family that long and have it work out very well. There's also, for some river guides, as I said, the issue of hubris and arrogance in their relationship, because they're dealing with such incredible adrenaline and dynamic situations that take a lot of courage. They can forget that they're humans sometimes. So these are all kind of personality challenges that river guides face. All right, given all that, let's take a little bit of a river trip through. We'll talk about some of these rapids that frame so much of the story of river running. As I mentioned, debris fans, tributary related debris fans develop from monster flash floods called debris flows. They come in, create a debris fan eddy complex, and this is a view of House Rock Rapid, one of the first big rapids that we come to in the river. The whole river is pushed right against the left shore of the river, and the river turns over here. When I started river running in 1976, well, I started in 1974, but when I started commercial river running in 1976, my first job was actually 2 years of working with the museum doing river running and to understand the invertebrate and vertebrate biodiversity of Grand Canyon. After those 2 years of training, I with $4.10 to my name from that work, wandered around town, finally found a company that I could come on to row with, and got a job saving myself from starvation. And then I got to begin to actually apply my skills to commercial river running. So my second commercial river trip, I said, I've got this figured out. I was about 25 years old. I know what I need to know. I can handle anything here now. Pretty comfortable down there. And we got to House Rock Rapid at a low flow, and scouting the rapid, like, yeah, I did this last trip. I can get through it again, no problem at all. So that was the first indication for me that I was getting a little bit arrogant about things. Of course, I got washed out of my boat, lost my shorts and my knife, and fortunately the boat didn't flip. But I went for quite a dramatic swim, and that's where humility really comes in. You can be the best river runner in the world, and you not necessarily come out where you want to be. So that was a lesson learned right off the bat in commercial river running. Stay humble and keep your wits about you. House Rock Rapid has killed a few people. It's quite a serious rapid, very shallow on the right side, and you have to navigate between those shallows and some very big holes in which the river is turning over. The whole river is turning over in that at the top of that very whitewater portion there at the bottom of the rapid. So it's a really fun, good test of a river, and very good test of to understand how your other crew members are we're going to handle the rest of the river trip. We're jumping over a lot of rapids in between here, but we're jumping down to Hance Rapid, mile 77. This is the longest rapid in the river. Very complicated rapid. You can see all the rocks that have come in from debris flows on both sides of the river. Large rocks, the land of the giants on the right side there. The runs here are incredibly complicated, and they change really dramatically over stage as the river goes from low flow to high flow. It really becomes a very different rapid. So at low flow, you can sneak into a portion right in the middle of the rapid. You can sneak into a quiet portion of water and work your way from the center of the rapid off to the left. And at high flow, you're going for the big stuff, and it's just there's no way around it. On one trip, I took the Nebraska corn huskers down. So I had 4 guys on my boat that weighed 300 pounds each, and then their mom, who is also a really formidable woman, quite large, jumped in the boat right at the last minute, and I took off down and went right through the far right side of this thing, filled with water. But I had so much weight in the boat I couldn't have turned over if I tried to back in the days of prior to self-bailing boats. So yeah, a lot of humility gained there. This is also a very dangerous rapid. We've had quite a few deaths here. The deaths on the river tend to be now from people on private trips, getting tangled in strange webbing designs that they've got on their boats, or just not knowing where they are at the right time. Fewer commercial deaths, but there have been some recent commercial deaths. So, and once you get through a rapid, one of the lessons that boatmen learn very quickly is that you don't give up, because down at the bottom on the left side is something called Lower Hance, or Summer Hance, and it has some very big waves, and boats have turned over there after they've navigated the difficulty of the main rapid there. Geomorphically, there's a very interesting kind of feature here. The Precambrian dike, 1.1 billion year old lavas that have snaked up through the sediments there, might actually play a role in why this rapid is configured as it is there. Moving downstream a little bit to Sockdolliger Rapid. This is a rapid that I've rated on a pretty wide scale, but at higher water, it's really quite a formidable thing. I get criticized for using a 10 scale of rapid rating in my book, as opposed to the American Whitewater 0 to 6 scale. And I use the 1 to 10 because it's just 0 to 10 because it's so much more intuitive than a 0 to 6. 0 to 6 scale rating system tells us the rapids in Grand Canyon never get much above a 3. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. These are rapids that have many different runs within them. Depending on what kind of boat you've got and where you are, this can be anything from a 1 to a 10, or maybe from a, say, 4 to a 10. And it changes really dramatically with changing flows. So river rapid classification is kind of based on the climbing scale, again 0 to 6, and with 6 being unrunnable, I guess, depending on what you're doing, but and 0 being flat water, basically. In my scale, a 0 is just flat water, no white water, and a 10 is unrunnable. But the reason for using that 10 scale is there's some history to it with the Belknap formulation, and I don't have a good way to use the American river rapid classification system to account for changing flows, or the different runs, or the different boat types. So depending on where you are, what you've got, what you're running, and what the flow is, these can be very different rapids. I've had the privilege of running the river at flows of as low as 1,000 CFS and as high as 100,000 CFS. And that has really opened my eyes. Pretty much every wave there covers over a pile of rocks, but the larger holes, such as occur in these bigger rapids, are as certain flows become hydraulic jumps. And those are dynamic energy features that where the waves start to erupt. And we see that kind of process go on as river stage increases. Horn Creek, I don't have an aerial view of this one because the images from the sky are too shady, but yeah, it's this is a view from the right side, looking at just a massive set of waves. Have had many friends injured here by trying to run these things, getting thrown up against the right wall, especially at low flow, or just getting trashed by this the bottom of the fourth wave there, and thrown into the rocks. At low flow at 1,000 CFS, we walk the passengers around, take our boats through 4 waterfalls. Bump, 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 and then slam into a black rock on the right side and break the oars on that side of the boat. That was the run and we did that 5 trips in a row in 1977. Pretty hard on the equipment. A lot of people have concern about Granite Rapid at mile 94. This is again, a rapid that runs right against the right side. The debris fan has pushed the river over to the right. The whole river turns over, and just monster waves there. I've been running this at a very low flow one time. Again, probably 1977. My boat got pushed up against the right wall. The water dropped completely out of it. My boat was perched on a pinnacle and probably 6 feet down to the water. And after about 30 seconds or so, the river surged back up and floated me off. But for a brief moment there, I thought it was really messed up. When I took the Mafia through this rapid on a commercial trip, I just took them down the left side, which is kind of shades of hell of a run, but I didn't really actually care whether, I shouldn't say this maybe, but whether it might have been better if they died. But as it turned out, they had the best river trip. They enjoyed the trip almost more than anybody else I've taken through. They were wonderful people, but they had some kind of job-related issues. All right, Hermit Rapid, the famous 5th wave of Hermit it does this at high flow. It's just an incredibly dynamic rapid. The last time I turned over a boat was in the 10th wave of this rapid. Made the mistake of just plowing into it, thinking I could get through it, and it just didn't want me to do that at all. So this is a lot of drama at this rep, and you never can be sure what's going to happen at a rapid like this. And for a river guide, we're going to do this, and we've done it before, but there's no guarantee that anything's going to happen here the way we want it to. Crystal, many injuries and deaths and issues here. This rapid was formed by a debris flow in 1965, December 65, in which a 1,000-year flood came through, brought sediments down from the north rim. The debris flow actually translated all the way across the river, created a dam there for a while. The river then refound a course through it. This rapid was then greatly changed by high flows in 1983, which washed out a lot of that 1966 debris and created a somewhat easier river run with two different ways to do it, left and right. But then the island down below there is what really has created a lot of trouble. 1977, I was able to walk all the way across the river on the island. I found 4 motorboats, motors from motorboats that had been ripped off the boats. 2 of them still had the transoms, meaning the back part of the boats attached to them, and telling you a little bit about the severity of the impact of boats on that island. The currents there are very complicated, and it's very difficult to navigate around that feature. As I say, we're jumping over lots and lots of different rapids here, but I'm just bringing you some stories about some of the individual features. Bedrock Rapid, you can see what the challenges are here. You get a nice kind of direct run on the river down to the rock, and the river turns right angles around this big piece of bedrock that's sticking up out of the floor of the river. So this is a place where you've got debris flow impacts on the geomorphology, but you've also got native bedrock sticking up out of the floor of the river. So this is one of the few rapids that actually has bedrock features sticking up in the middle of the rapid. So many stories here. People running down, getting swept off to the left side, trying to navigate that left channel around the rock, screaming, and come down with trips where an entire 6-boat private trip, all trapped in the left eddy there above the rock, and wondering what to do, helping them get through that or boats stuck up against the rock on the front, or in that very tight cove on the inside of the rock there. Just completely chaotic. The river is very deep below this. It drops down to about 80 feet deep or so. And so it's really a turbulent situation there. One motor trip here famously crashed. I think they had something like half a dozen femur fractures. The boat was destroyed. The entire trip had to be evacuated by helicopter off this rock. So many stories, just so many stories about each of these rapids. Dubendorf, again, many stories. One of the first runs here back in 1928 or 1929 or so was a trip in which they got a boat stuck on the bottom part there, and had to create a Tyrolean traverse from the rock out to shoreline and to try to get the boat off. So, all right, Lava Falls, world-renowned whitewater rapid. It's only whitewater when the river is flowing clear, but this is a just incredibly dynamic rapid. Unlike many of the rapids in Grand Canyon, this is one where you have to set up and you don't really know what's going to happen, and anything can happen. We've had people running from the right side, trying to do a right run that ended up crashing into the black rock from which this picture in the middle bottom is taken of Jerry Lidber rowing the Columbine Falls. So you can end up with a left to right run if you do the right side, come down through this, drop into the V waves, and if you hit the eddy on the upstream side of the rock, it swirls so quickly you can't get out of it. We've had boats in there for up to 8 minutes. On trips that I've been on. 3 people that I know of have been thrown out of their boats and sucked through a hole below the surface between that black rock and the shore. It's a hole not much bigger than a manhole, and that people have not died there yet is really just astounding. So much story just about this one rapid of a German guy who hiked down, took off all his clothes and swam through naked, and then came back up and did it 2 more times. Just the whole trip's flipping, and some people dying sometimes in some of those trips. Many stories here. My last run, I set up for a right run, pushed my boat out, got into I was exactly where I wanted to be, and I got washed out of my boat. Fortunately, again, the boat didn't turn over. The passengers survived it. They had a lot to talk about, as I did as well. But again, very humbling to go through this, and you can never be sure that you can actually get through unscathed. Now, a couple of other rapids in the lower river. This is a rapid about 246, and it was the largest rapid on the river, even bigger than Separation Rapid that Paul wrote so much about. And it was only run a couple times before it was inundated by Lake Mead. And I wanted to read you the statement that one of the river runners had made about it. This is what George Corbell wrote about it in 1896. There was a large boulder in the middle of the river, the size of a small house, where most of the water piled up and broke off on both sides. To the right, it was filled with smaller rocks. It was impossible to pass that side. There was a pass of 30 feet between the rock and the left side. The water, after breaking off the rock, went to the wall. Where the water runs to the wall is a very bad place, for if the boat once touches it, she is gone. This is the confluence of Spencer Creek here, and it's now, the sediments of Lake Mead have filled in this rapid. But Spencer Creek continues to flash flood, and it's creating a small rapid here, which is some recovery of this largest rapid of Grand Canyon. But it's essentially an extinct rapid at this point. In great contrast, is Pierce's Ferry Rapid down at mile 280, just below the takeout at Pierce Ferry. And this is a rapid that's been created as the lake level has dropped. The river has carved a new course and passed across this rapid. Most of the rapids in Grand Canyon, are fairly small, less than 15 feet. Even lava falls, pretty low gradient drop rapid, as all these are. But the way it gets down is pretty tough, and you can see with the curving of the river here, the bouncing off that left bank and just completely churning over. This is a rapid that does not run commercially. Nobody in their right mind would run this commercially, thinking they could safely take passengers through. So. But this is an example of a rapid created in post-dam times, as especially recent times as the lake level has dropped. When the lake level rises again, if it does, this will be inundated and it won't be a challenge here. But right now, it's a really big deal. It may even be a fish barrier for fish moving upstream. All right, so I've gone through some of the lessons learned here, and hope you've this little river trip through Grand Canyon has not scared you off. It's a really tremendous trip, life-changing adventure, and the rapids are certainly a key part of it. They're not the only part. There's so much else going on in Grand Canyon, as the lectures that we've been giving here hopefully have helped you see. But this is a lot of the draw for Grand Canyon, is the adventure of going through these beautiful big places. Humility, I think, is the main lesson that all of us learn, and preparedness.